Hello, everybody, and how are you? I do hope you're well. I'm just trying to find my other browser window because I was looking at it a minute ago. So, I'm Jeff. I read old fashioned children's stories here 3 times a week. It started last year during lockdown in New Zealand, and I've carried it on intermittently ever since. Old fashioned stories because sometimes it's good to just, in your head, get away from where you currently are, the different things that are going on. Just have a break and listen to a good old fashioned kid's story. So that's what I read. Um, the books that I read are ones that I grew up reading or listening to, that my parents grew up reading or listening to, and my grandparents grew up reading or listening to. They're largely Victorian and Edwardian stories. They're usually a little bit of fun, not entirely boring. They're not textbooks, they're kids' adventure stories in the early days of when that sort of thing was getting going. They are rough reads. I do make mistakes. I lose where I am on the page, and so I'll start again. I'll pause and I'll explain something which I think that the average reader these days wouldn't necessarily know what it is that's in the script. Often there will be an object mentioned that I'm very familiar with because I grew up in a fairly old-fashioned lifestyle living out in the country, but I'm very aware that a lot of my listeners don't know. So if I think it's something that someone's not going to understand, I will explain it. Sometimes I over-explain and then discover that the story will explain itself, but so often there will be something that's mentioned in the story that's so common at the time when the story was written that the author hasn't bothered to explain it. And so those are the ones that I'm trying to aim for. So, yep, rough reads, my mistakes, my pauses, my little comments about things. I generally only chat when we get to chapter breaks. So you're welcome to make comments in the chat as I'm reading, but I won't get into conversation with you about those things until after we get to the end of a chapter. And don't feel that you have to chat. You're quite welcome to sit and lurk. That's a good thing. I mean, that's what you do when you're listening to a story, isn't it? I'm just going to put my little tiara on because it's Friday and this is the formal Friday, not casual Friday, because we're all at home at the moment because we're in lockdown in the Auckland region, and so it's quite nice to have an excuse to wear something just a little bit special. My contribution to that is the little mini tiara for Formal Friday. I'm just wondering if there's anything else I need to tell you. If you follow me on Twitch or if you subscribe to me on YouTube, you will be notified. Your computer will notify you when I go online with my next story, and will continue to do so. Do that if you would like to be able to listen to the next installment. Stories that I read here will get transferred over to here on Twitch, will get transferred to YouTube about 2 weeks after I've read them on Twitch, and then they will get grouped into playlists of books. So with that in mind, grab your drink of water, your snacks, and somewhere nice and comfortable to sit so we can read. Here we go. I'm Jev. I'm reading New Treasure Seekers by Edith Nesbit, subtitled Or the Bastable Children in Search of a Fortune, which sounds a little bit like the first one. Although story-wise, it's a different collection of stories. We are reading chapter 11. I just had to do some mental arithmetic then. Schoolwork, oh dear, mental arithmetic. Chapter 11, Zaida, the mysterious prophetess of the Golden Orient. That sounds intriguing. How can they mess this one up? Let's carry on. This is the story of how we were gypsies and wandering minstrels, and like everything else we did about that time, it was done to make money for Miss Sandal, whose poorness kept on making our kind hearts ache. So the children in the previous few chapters, sorry, my chair is trying to slide away, so I'll try to get it so it won't. The children have been sent from their home up in London to next to Blackheath to the south coast in England because they've had measles, I think it was. Much more common back then than it is now. Actually, it was even common when I was at school, when I was a child, because we didn't have a measles vaccination back then. So these days, most children never have the experience. Not necessarily comfortable, but it was quite infectious, and so therefore, once you'd got over the infectious stage, you still needed time away from other children, and you needed to give your body a chance to recover. So the children have been sent down to the south coast so they don't pass on any infections to other children, but also to get some fresh air and get away from the city and get over their measles. And the lady they've been staying with is a lady called Miss Sandal. She is sister of someone else they know up in the city and appears to be poor and do lots of good things to help people. So she's now back up in the city looking after her brother, and the housekeeper is looking after the children. And so the children are, in their own way, trying to be nice and helpful to her to make some money for her so that life won't be so hard for her. They probably don't understand that she's partly poor by choice because she lives a life of poverty, so she can put what she has towards helping those who are worse off than herself. I'm thinking they're going to find this out at some stage in the story. Anyway, we'll carry on. This is the story of how we were gypsies and wandering minstrels, and like everything else we did about that time, it was done to make money for Miss Sandal, whose poorness kept on making our hearts ache. And it was making our hearts ache. It is rather difficult to get up any good game in a house like Miss Sandal's, where there is nothing lying about except your own things, and where everything is so neat and necessary. Your own clothes are seldom interesting, and even if you change hats with your sisters, it is not a complete disguise. The idea of being gypsies was due to Alice. She had not at all liked being entirely out of the smuggling affray, previous chapter, though Oswald explained to her that it was her own fault for having been born a girl. And of course, after the event, Dickie and I had some things to talk about that the girls hadn't, and we had a couple of wet days. So Alice was feeling rather left out. You have no idea how dull you can be in a house like that unless you happen to know the sort of house I mean. A house that is meant for plain living and high thinking, like Miss Sandal told us, may be very nice for the high thinkers, but if you are not accustomed to thinking high, there is only the plain living left, and it is like boiled rice for every meal to any young mind. I can see the potential for mischief coming just because they're bored. Can you? However much beef and like boiled rice for every meal to any young mind, however much beef in Yorkshire there may be for the young insides. Mrs. Beale, that's the lady who does the housekeeping and the cooking, saw to our having plenty of nice things to eat, but alas, it is not always dinner time, and in between meals, the cold rice pudding feeling is very chilling. Of course, we had the splendid drawings of winged things made by our flying lodger, but you cannot look at pictures all day long, however many coloured chalks they are drawn with, and however fond you may be of them. This is another thing that was in the last day's reading, so you can go and look for that, either here on Twitch or over on YouTube when it comes up there. Miss Sandal's was the kind of house that makes you wander all round it and say, "What shall we do next?" And when it rains, the little ones get cross. It was the second wet day when we were wandering around the house to the sad music of our boots on the clean, bare boards that Alice said, "Mrs. Beale has got a book at her house called Napoleon's Book of Fate. You might ask her to let you go and get it, Oswald. She likes you best." Oswald is as modest as anyone I know, but the truth is the truth. And in case you hadn't guessed it, Oswald is our narrator. "We could tell our fortunes and read the dark future," Alice went on. "It would be better than high thinking about without anything particular to think about." So Oswald went down to Mrs. Beale and said, "I say, Beely dear, you've got a book up at your place. I wish you'd lend it to us to read." "If it's the holy book you mean, sir," replied Mrs. Beale, going on with peeling the potatoes that were to be a radiant vision later on, all brown and crisp in company of a leg of mutton. "If it's the holy book you want, there's one up on Miss Sandal's chest of drawers." "I know," said Oswald. He knew every book in the house. The backs of them were beautiful, leather and gold, but inside they were like whited sepulchres, full of poetry and improving reading. No, we don't want that book just now. It's a book called Napoleon's Book of Fate. Would you mind if I ran up to your place and got it? There is no one at home, said Mrs. Beale. Wait a bit till I go along to the Bacchus with the meat, and I'll fetch it along. You might let me go, said Oswald, whose high spirit is always ill-attuned to waiting a bit. I wouldn't touch anything else, and I know where you keep the key. There's precious little as ye don't know, it seemed to me, said Mrs. Beale. There, run along, do. It's on the top of the mantel-shelf alongside the picture tea tin. It's a red book. Don't go taking the Wesleyan Conference reports by mistake. The two is both together on the mantel. Here he is asking Mrs. Beale, who's sitting peeling potatoes. And yes, I do still need to get these pictures up onto our Discord server. Sorry. I suppose I need to make a big announcement when I finally do get them up there. And then you'll all rush over there and start commenting like mad. That would be cool. In the meantime, you can look the book up online and see if you can find the illustrations. Nesbit, Edith Nesbit, New Treasure Seekers. Illustrations. There you go. That's how you put the Google search. Something like that. Anyway, Oswald in his macca, that's his Macintosh, splashed through the mud to Mrs. Beale's, found the key under the loose tile behind the water butt, and got the book without adventure. He had promised not to touch anything else, so he could not make even the gentlest booby trap as a little surprise for Mrs. Beale when she got back. And most of that day we were telling our fortunes by the ingenious means invented by the great emperor, or by cards, which is hard to remember the rules for, or by our dreams. The only blights were that the others all wanted to have the book all the time, and that Noel's dreams were so long and mixed that we got tired of hearing about them before he did. But he said he was quite sure he had dreamed every single bit of every one of them. And the author hopes this was the truth. We all went to bed hoping we should dream something that we could look up in the dream book, but none of us did. And in the morning it was still raining, and Alice said, "Look here, if it ever clears up again, let's dress up and be gypsies. We can go about in the distant villages telling people's fortunes. If you'll let me have the book all today, I can learn up quite enough to tell them mysteriously and darkly. And gypsies always get their hands crossed with silver." That's actually just giving them a coin. Dickie said that was the one way of keeping the book to herself. But Oswald said, "Let her try. She shall have it for an hour, and then we'll have an exam to see how much she knows." This was done, but while she was swatting the thing up with her fingers in her ears, we began to talk about how gypsies should be dressed. And when we all went out of the room to see if we could find anything in that tidy house to dress up in, she came after us to see what was up. So there was no exam. We peeped into cupboards and drawers in Miss Sandal's room, but everything was grey or brown, not at all the sort of thing to dress up for the children of the sunny south in. The plain living was shown in all her clothes, and besides, grey shows every little spot you may happen to get on it. We were almost in despair. We looked in all the drawers and all the rooms, but found only sheets and tablecloths and more grey and brown clothing. We tried the attic with fainting hearts. Servants' clothes are always good for dressing up with. They have so many different colours, but Miss Sandal had no servant. Still, she might have had once, and the servant might have left something behind her. Dora suggested this and added, if you don't find anything in the attic, you'll know it's fate, and you're not to do it. Besides, I'm almost sure you can be put in prison for telling fortunes." "Not if you're a gypsy, you can't," said Noel. "They have licenses to tell fortunes, I believe, and judges can't do anything to them." Excuse me, I just need to itch my eye. I feel like there's something on my eyelid. It's irritating. We haven't got to the stage of me reading you stories where my whole face gets itchy because I've been talking to the cat, but my nose is there. Always. Sorry. It's part of being ADHD, I think. And also on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, because or my senses are turned up louder than most people, so I notice little things that irritate it. So here we go. So we went up to the attic, and it was as bare and tidy as the rest of the house. Sorry, I just realised my browser isn't doing what it should be. But there were some boxes, and we looked in them. There's something twitching in the corner of my eye. Probably a bit of fluff. I could just see it moving when I was talking. What a nuisance. So we went up to the attic, and it was as bare and tidy as the rest of the house, but there were some boxes, and we looked in them. The smallest was full of old letters. So we shut it again at once. Another had books in it, and the last had a clean towel spread over what was inside. So we took off the towel, and then everyone said, "Oh." In right on the top was a scarlet thing, embroidered heavily with gold. It proved, on unfolding, to be a sort of coat, like a Chinaman's. We lifted it out and laid it on the towel on the floor, and then the full glories of that box were revealed. We'll see. There were cloaks and dresses and skirts and scarves of all the colours of a well-chosen rainbow, and all made of the most beautiful silks and stuffs, with things worked on them with silk, as well as chains of beads and many lovely ornaments. We think Miss Sandal must have been very fond of pretty things when she was young, or when she was better off, in other words, had a bit more money. "Well, there won't be any gypsies nearby to come up to us," said Oswald joyously. "Do you think we ought to take them without asking?" "Of course not," said Oswald witheringly. "We ought to write to her and say, 'Please, Miss Sandal, we know how poor you are, and may we borrow your things to be gypsies in, so we can get money for you.' All right, you go and write the letter, Dora." "I only just asked," said Dora. We tried the things on. Some of them were so ladylike they were no good, evening dresses and things like that. But there were enough useful things to go round. Oswald, in white shirt and flannel knee breeches, tied a brick-coloured scarf round his middle part, and a green one round his head for a turban. The turban was fastened with a sparkling brooch with pink stones in it. He looked like a Moorish toreador. That's a bullfighter. Dicky had the scarlet and gold coat, which was the right length when Dora had run a tuck in it. Alice had a blue skirt with embroidery of peacock's feathers on it, and a gold and black jacket, very short, with no sleeves, and a yellow silk handkerchief on her head, like Italian peasants, and another hanky round her neck. Dora's skirt was green, and her handkerchiefs purple and pink. Noel insisted on having his two scarves, one green and one yellow, twisted on his legs like puttees. Those are cloth that was wrapped around the top of your shoes and boots and went up your leg a bit to cover your socks and things, so that different things, when you're in the tropics, wouldn't fall down inside your boots or your shoes and cause you injury. Things like insects that might bite, or stones that might give you a stone bruise. And a red scarf wound round his middle part, and he stuck a long ostrich feather in his own bicycle cap and said he was a troubadour bard. H.O. was able to wear a lady's blouse of mouse-coloured silk embroidered with poppies. It came down to his knees, and a jewelled belt kept it in place. We made up our costumes into bundles, and Alice thoughtfully bought a pennyworth of pins. Of course, it was idle to suppose that we could go through the village in our gypsy clothing without exciting some remark. Oh dear, trouble is coming. Can't you just feel it? The more we thought of it, the more it seemed as if it would be a good thing to get some way from our village before we began our gypsy career. The woman at the sweet shop where Alice got the pins has a donkey and cart, and for 2 shillings she consented to lend us this, so that some of us could walk while some of us would always be resting in the cart. The next morning the weather was bright and blue as ever, and we started. We were beautifully clean, but all our hair had been arranged with the brush solely, because at the last moment nobody could find its comb. Mrs. Beale had packed up a jolly sandwichy and appley lunch for us. We told her we were going to gather bluebells in the woods, and of course we meant to do that too. Yes, because it's not yet fully summer. We had primroses on when they were looking out the window on the train or out of the carriage or something like that at the beginning of the book. So it's spring, therefore bluebells. The donkey cart drew up at the door, and we started. It was found impossible to get everyone into the cart at once, so we agreed to cast lots for who should run behind and to take it in turns mile and mile. The lot fell to Dora and H.O., but there was precious little running about it. Anything slower than that donkey Oswald has never known, and when it came to passing its own front door, the donkey simply would not. It ended in Oswald getting down and going to the animal's head and having it out with him man to man. The donkey was small, but of enormous strength. He set all his 4 feet firm and leaned back, and Oswald set his 2 feet firm and leaned back, so that Oswald and the front part of the donkey formed an angry and contentious letter V, and Oswald gazed in the donkey's eyes in a dauntless manner, and the donkey looked at Oswald as though it thought he was hay or thistles. Alice beat the donkey from the cart with a stick that had been given to us for the purpose. The rest shouted, but all was in vain, and 4 people in a motor car stopped it, the car, to see the heroic struggle, and laughed till I thought they would have upset their hateful motor. However, it was all for the best, though Oswald did not see it at the time. When they had had enough of laughing, they started their machine again, and the noise it made penetrated the donkey's dull intelligence, and he started off without a word. I mean, without any warning, and Oswald has only just time to throw himself clear of the wheels before he fell on the ground and rolled over, biting the dust. The motor car people behaved as you would expect, but accidents happen even to motor cars when people laugh too long and too unfeelingly. The driver turned round to laugh, and the motor instantly took the bit between its teeth and bolted into the stone wall of the churchyard. No one was hurt except the motor, but that had to spend the day at the blacksmith's, we heard afterwards. Thus was the outraged Oswald avenged by fate. And here's a picture. Alice beat the donkey from the cart, the rest shouted, and you've also got the motor car behind them. So here you go. Here's Oswald pulling, and the donkey pulling in the other direction, and the others sitting in the cart, and then behind, in the background, you've got the back end of the car, the motor, that the others are sitting in, watching and laughing. I wonder if they might be people who turn up in the story a bit later. We'll find out. He was not hurt either, though much the motor people would have cared if he had been. That's Oswald. And he caught up with the others at the end of the village, for the donkey's pace had been too good to last, and the triumphal progress was resumed. That was a slow, leisurely pace. It was some time before we found a wood sufficiently looking for our secret purposes. There are no woods close to the village, but at last, up by Bonington, we found one, and tying our noble steed to the signpost that says how many miles it is to Ashford, we cast a hasty glance round, and finding no one in sight, disappeared in the woods with our bundles. We went in just ordinary creatures. We came out gypsies of the deepest dye, for we had got a pennyworth of walnut stain from Mr. Jamison the builder, and mixed with water, the water we had brought in a medicine bottle. It was a prime disguise, and we knew it would wash off, unlike the Condy's fluid we once stained ourselves with during a never-to-be-forgotten game of Jungle Book. That's in the first book. We had put on all the glorious things we had bagged from Miss Sandal's attic treasures, but still Alice had a small bundle, unopened. "What's that?" Dora asked. "I meant to keep it as a reserve force, in case the fortune-telling didn't turn out all our fancy painted it," said Alice. "But I don't mind telling you now." She opened the bundle, and there was a tambourine, some black lace, a packet of cigarette papers, and our missing combs. Cigarette papers and combs for making music. Ooh. We'll get to that. Whatever on earth, Dickie was beginning, but Oswald saw it all. He has a wonderfully keen nose, and he said, "Bully for you, Alice. I wish I'd thought it myself." Alice was much pleased by this handsome speech. "Yes," she said, "perhaps really it would be best to begin with it. It would attract the public's attention, and then we could tell the fortunes. You see," she kindly explained to Dickie and H.O. and Dora, who had not seen it yet, though Noel had almost as soon as I did, "you see, we'll all play on the combs with the veils over our faces, so that no one can see what our instruments are. Why, they might be mouth organs for anything anyone will know, or some costly instruments from the far-off East, like they play to sultans in zenanas, whatever that is. You can look it up. Zenanas. Let's try a tune or two before we go on, to be sure that all the combs work right. Dora's has such big teeth. I should wonder that it wouldn't act at all." So we all papered our combs and did Heroes, but that sounded awful. The Girl I Left Behind Me went better, and so did Bonnie Dundee. But we thought See the Conquering or The Death of Nelson would be the best to begin with. It sounds a little bit like a kazoo, a humming buzz, when you use a comb. Most of you won't have heard of doing that, or even heard of what a kazoo is. You can look that one up too, Kazoo. It was beastly hot doing it under the veils, but when Oswald had done one tune without the veil to see how the others looked, he could not help owning that the veils did give a hidden mystery that was a stranger to simple combs. We were all a bit puffed when we had played for a while, so we decided that as the donkey seemed calm and was eating grass and resting, we might as well follow his example. "We ought not to be too proud to take pattern by the brute creation," said Dora. Learn from the things around us. So we had our lunch in the wood. We lighted a little fire of sticks and fir cones, so as to be as gypsyish as we could, and we sat around the fire. We made a charming picture in our bright clothes, among what would have been our native surroundings if we had been real gypsies, and we knew how nice we looked, and stayed there, though the smoke got in our eyes and everything we ate tasted of it. The woods were a little damp, and that was why the fire smoked so. There were the jackets we had cast off when we dressed up to sit on, and there was a horsecloth in the cart intended for the donkey's wear, but we decided that our need was greater than its, so we took the blanket to recline on. It was as jolly a lunch as ever, I remember, and we lingered over that and looking romantic till we could not bear the smoke any more. Then we got a lot of bluebells, and we trampled out the fire most carefully, because we know about not setting woods and places alight, rolled up our clothes in bundles, and went out of the shadowy woodland into the bright sunlight, as sparkling-looking a crew of gypsies as anyone need wish for. Last time we had seen the road, it had been quite white and bare of persons walking on it, but now there were several, and not only walkers, but people in carts, and some carriages passed us too. Everyone stared at us, but they did not seem so astonished as we had every right to expect, and though interested, they were not rude, and this is very rare among English people, and not only poor people either, when they see anything at all out of the way. Very rare among English people when they see anything at all out of the way. Not only poor people like that. We asked one man, who was very Sunday best indeed, with black clothes and a blue tie, where everyone was going, for everyone was going in the same way, and everyone looked as if it was going to the church, which was unlikely, it being but Thursday. He said, "Same place what you are going to, I expect." And when we said, "Where was that?" we were requested by him to get along with us, which we did. An old woman in the heaviest bonnet I have ever seen, and the highest, it was like a black church, revealed the secret to us, and we learned that there was to be a primrose fete going on in Sir Willoughby Blockson's grounds. We instantly decided to go to the fete. "I've been to a primrose fete, and so have you, Dora," Oswald remarked, "and people are so dull at them, and they'll gladly give gold to see the dark future, and besides, the villages will be unpopulated, and no one at home but idiots and babies and their keepers." So we went to the fete. The anticipation. The people got thicker and thicker. And when we got to Sir Willoughby's lodge gates, which have sprawling lions on the gateposts, we were told to take the donkey cart round to the stable yard. This we did, and proud was the moment when a stiff groom had to bend his proud stomach to go to the head of Bates' donkey. "This is something like," said Alice, and Noel added, "the foreign princes are well received at this palace." "We aren't princes, we're gypsies," said Dora, tucking his scarf in. It would keep on getting loose. Sorry, itchy nose. I said that would happen. "There are gypsy princes, though," said Noel, "because there are gypsy kings." "You aren't always a prince first," said Dora. "Don't wriggle so or I'll fix you. Sometimes being made a king just happens to someone who isn't one in particular." Sorry. It's like I have a piece of very fine cat fur tickling the end of my nose. It does happen from time to time. "I don't think so," said Noel. "You have to be a prince before you're a king, just as you have to be a kitten before you're a cat, or a puppy before you're a dog, or a worm before you're a serpent, or—" "What about the King of Sweden?" Dora was beginning when a very nice, tall, thin man, with white flowers in his buttonhole like for a wedding, came strolling up and said, "And whose show is this, eh, what?" We said it was ours. "Are you expected?" he asked. We said we thought not, but we hoped he didn't mind. "Why, what are you? Acrobats? Tightrope? That's a ripping Burmese coat you've got there." "Yes, it is." "No, we aren't," said Alice with dignity. I am Zaida, the mysterious prophetess of the Golden Orient, and the others are mysterious too, but we haven't fixed on their names yet." "By Jove," said the gentleman, "but who are you really?" "Our names are our secret," said Oswald with dignity, but Alice said, "Oh, but we don't mind telling you because I'm sure you're nice. We're really the Bastables, and we want to get some money for someone we know who's rather poor. Of course, I can't tell you her name. And we've learned how to tell fortunes, really we have. Do you think they'll let us tell them at the fete? People are often dull at fetes, aren't they?" "By Jove," said the gentleman again. "By Jove, by Jove, they are." He plunged for a moment in deep reflection. "We've got musical instruments," said Noel. "Shall we play for you a little?" "Not here," said the gentleman. "Follow me." He led the way by the backs of shrubberies to an old summer house, and we asked him to wait outside. Then we put on our veils and tuned up "See the Conquering." But he did not let us finish the tune. He burst in upon us crying, "Ripping, oh, ripping, and now tell me my fortune." Alice took off her veil and looked at his hand. "You will travel to distant lands," she said. "You will have great wealth and honour. You will marry a beautiful lady, a very fine woman, it says in the book, but I think a beautiful lady sounds nicer, don't you?" And here's a picture of them with the gentleman and the children. There they all are, looking at each other. We've got musical instruments as the caption. "I think a beautiful lady sounds nicer, don't you?" "Much, but I shouldn't mention the book when you're telling the fortune." "I wouldn't except to you," said Alice, "and she'll have lots of money and a very sweet disposition. Trials and troubles beset your path, but be brave and fearless, and you will overcome all your enemies. Beware of a dark woman, most likely a widow." "I will," said he, for Alice had stopped for breath. "Is that all?" "No, beware of a dark woman and shun the society of drunkards and gamblers. Be very cautious in your choice of acquaintances, or you will make a false friend who will be your ruin. That's all, except that you will be married very soon and live to a green old age with the beloved wife of your bosom and have 12 sons and—" "Stop, stop," said the gentleman. 12 sons are as many as I can bring up handsomely on my present income. Now, look here, you did that jolly well, only go slower and pretend to look for things in the hand before you say them. Everything's free at the fete, so you'll get no money for your fortune-telling." Gloom was on each young brow. "It's like this," he went on. "There is a lady fortune-teller in a tent in the park." "Then we may as well get along home," said Dicky. "Not at all," said our new friend, for such he was now about to prove himself to be. "That lady does not want to tell fortunes today. She has a headache. Now, if you'll really stick to it and tell the people's fortunes as well as you told mine, I'll stand you, let's see, 2 quid for the afternoon. Will that do? What? We said we should just jolly well think it would. I've got some eau de cologne and a medicine bottle, Dora said. My brother Noel has headaches sometimes, but I think he's doing all right today. Do take it. It will do the lady's head good. I'll take care of her head, he said, laughing, but he took the bottle and said, thank you. Then he told us to stay where we were a little while he made final arrangements, and we were left with the palpitating breasts to look wildly through the book of fate so as to have the things ready. But it turned out to be time thrown away, for when he came back he said to Alice, it'll have to be only you and your sister, please, for I see they've stuck up a card with Esmeralda, the gypsy princess, reads the hand and foretells the future on it, so you boys will have to be mum. You can be attendants, mutes, by Jove. Yes, that's it. And I say, kiddies, you will jolly well play up, won't you? Don't stand any cheek. Stick it on, you know. I can't tell you how important it is about the lady's headache. I think he's got something underway. I don't know that she actually has a headache. Maybe he's got a plan in mind. I should think this would be a cool place for a headache to be quiet in, said Dora, and it was, for it was quite hidden in the shrubbery and no path to it. Remember, they were in the summer house. By Jove, he remarked yet once again, so it would. You're right. He led us out of the shrubbery and across the park. There were people dotted all about, and they stared, but they touched their hats to the gentleman, and he returned their salute with stern politeness. Inside the tent with Esmeralda, etc., outside, there was a lady in a hat and dust cloak, but we could see her spangles under the cloak. Now, said the gentleman to Dicky, you stand at the door and let people in, one at a time. You others can just play a few bars on your instruments for each new person, only a very little, because you do get out of tune, though that's barbaric certainly. Now, here's the 2 quid, and you stick to the show till 5. You'll hear the stable clock chime. The lady was very pale, with black marks under her eyes, and her eyes looked red, Oswald thought. She seemed about to speak, but the gentleman said, do trust me, Ella. I'll explain everything directly. Just go to the old summer house, you know, and I'll be there directly. I'll take a couple of pegs out of the back, and you can slip away among the trees. Hold your cloak close over your gown. Goodbye, kiddies. Stay. Give me your address, and I'll write and tell you if my fortune comes true. So he shook hands with us and went. And we did stick to it, though it is far less fun than you would think, telling fortunes all afternoon in a stuffy tent, while outside you know there are things to eat and people enjoying themselves. But there were the 2 gold quid, and we were determined to earn them. It is very hard to tell a different fortune for each person, and there were a great many. The girls took it in turns, and Oswald wonders why their hairs did not go grey, though of course it was much better fun for them than for us, because we had just to be mutes when we weren't playing on the combs. The people we told fortunes to at first laughed, and said we were too young to know anything, but Oswald said in a hollow voice that we were as old as the pyramids, and after that Alice took the tucks out of Dicky's red coat and put it on and turbaned herself and looked much older. The stable clock had chimed the 5:15 some little time when an elderly gentleman with whiskers, who afterwards proved to be Sir Willoughby, burst into the tent. "Where's Miss Blockson?" he said, and we answered truthfully that we did not know. "How long have you been here?" he furiously asked. "Ever since 2, said Alice wearily. He said a word that I should have thought a baronet would have been above using. "Who brought you here?" We described the gentleman who had done this, and again the baronet said things we should never be allowed to say. "That confounded Carew," he added, with more words. Lots of bad language. "Is anything wrong?" asked Dora. "Can we do anything? We'll stay on longer if you like, if you can't find the lady who was doing Esmeralda before we came." "I'm not very likely to find her," he said ferociously. "Stay longer indeed. Get away out of my sight before I have you locked up for vagrants and vagabonds." He left the scene in bounding and mad fury. We thought it best to do as he said, and went round the back way to the stables so as to avoid exciting his ungoverned rage by meeting him again. We found our cart and went home. We had got 2 quid and something to talk about. But none of us, not even Oswald the discerning, understood exactly what we had been mixed up in, till the pink satin box with 3 large bottles of A1 scent in it and postmarks of foreign lands came to Dora. And there was a letter. It said, "My dear gypsies, I beg to return the eau de cologne you so kindly lent me. The lady did use a little of it, but I found that foreign travel was what she really wanted to make her quite happy, so we caught the 4:15 to town, and now we are married and intend to live to a green old age, etc., as you foretold. But for your help, my fortune couldn't have come true, because my wife's father, Sir Willoughby, thought I was not rich enough to marry, but you see I was, and my wife and I both thank you heartily for your kind help. I hope it was not an awful swat. I had to say 5 because of the train. Good luck to you, and thanks awfully. Yours faithfully, Carisbrook Carew." If Oswald had known beforehand, we should never have made that 2 quid for Miss Sandal. For Oswald does not approve of marriages, and would never, if he knew it, be the means of assisting one to occur. He's just young enough to not be impressed by the idea of being with a woman for the rest of his life. And that's the end of that chapter, and I'm going to itch my nose and have a drink of water. Oh, sorry. Oh. There. That's a bit better. Do you feel a bit better now? I do. Ah, dear. Do you have something to drink handy? That's a good idea, because your brain needs, and your body need to have enough water during the day to be able to function well. Sometimes you can get a headache if you haven't had enough water. I've done that before, more than once. It's not fun. No, it's not fun. And now we shall carry on with the next chapter, because there's nothing to chat about in between. Oh, and I have figured out what book we're going to be reading next once we've finished this one. Whether we finish it today or another day, that doesn't really matter. But I do know what book we're going to be reading next. In fact, it's written by an author that the Bastable children have referred to before. It's written by Rudyard Kipling. It's not Storky and Co., but it is another one of Rudyard Kipling's children's books. So it should be quite interesting. It will have a little bit of history. It'll have fables and myths and all sorts of things, all told from a different perspective. We'll see how that one goes. I've read it years and years and years ago. Probably a little bit too young to be reading it at the time inside my head. Some things, if you hear them, make more sense than if you read them for yourself, especially when you're younger. And this is one of those ones that was just a little bit confusing when I was reading it inside my head when I was younger. Quite a lot younger. Anyway, so we shall carry on with reading this story, which is New Treasure Seekers, or The Bastable Children in Search of a Fortune by E. Nesbit. And we are reading Chapter 12, The Lady and the License, or Friendship's Garland. My dear kiddies, Miss Sandal's married sister has just come home from Australia and she feels very tired. No wonder, you will say, after such a long journey. So she is going to Lymchurch to rest, or Limechurch. I never know how to say that one. Actually, how about we look that one up? I'm sorry, but I'm going to interrupt. And I'm just going to put my microphone on mute for a second because my keyboard's very noisy. Can't find it, so I'm guessing it's actually a made-up place for the book. and I'm going to call it Limb Church, just because that's what I feel like. Then I don't have to try and say it both ways every time. No wonder, you will say, after such a long journey. So she is going to Limb Church to rest. Now I want you all to be very quiet, because when you are in your usual form, you aren't exactly restful, are you? If this weather lasts, you will be able to be out most of the time, and when you are indoors, for goodness sake, control your lungs and your boots, especially HOs. Mrs. Bax has travelled about a good deal, and once was nearly eaten by cannibals, but I hope you won't bother her to tell your stories. She is coming on Friday. So the cottage they're staying in down by the south coast is at a place in the story called Limb Church, in case you hadn't figured that out. She's coming on Friday. I am glad to hear from Alice's letter that you enjoyed the primrose fete. Tell Noel that poetical is not the usual way of spelling the word he wants. Poetticle is not the usual way of spelling the word he wants. I send you 10 shillings for pocket money, and again implore you to let Mrs. Bax have a little rest and peace. Your loving father. P.S. If you want anything sent down, tell me, and I will get Mrs. Bax to bring it. I met your friend, Mr. Redhouse, the other day at lunch. When the letter had been read aloud, and we had each read it to ourselves, a sad silence took place. Dickie was the first to speak. It is rather beastly, I grant you, he said, but it might be worse. I don't see how, said H.O. I do wish father would jolly well learn to leave my boots alone. H.O.'s the youngest, and he hasn't yet learnt to walk gently with his feet. He tends to clomp everywhere he goes in his boots, and they're probably a little bit big for him too. I do wish father would jolly well learn to leave my boots alone. It might be worse, I tell you, said Dickie. Suppose instead of telling us to keep out of doors, it had been the other way. Yes, said Alice, suppose it had been. Poor Mrs. Bax requires to be cheered up. Do not leave her side, day or night. Take it in turns to make jokes for her. Let not a moment pass without some merry jest. Oh, yes, it might be much, much worse. She was giving examples. Being able to get out all day makes it all right about trying to make that £2 increase and multiply. That's the £2 that they got from the primrose fete. Now, who's going to meet her at the station? Because after all, it's her sister's house, and we've got to be polite to visitors even if we're in a house we aren't related to. This was seen to be so, but no one was keen on going to the station. At last, Oswald, ever ready for forlorn hopes, consented to go. We told Mrs. Beale, and she got the best room ready, scrubbing everything till it smelt deliciously of wet wood and mottled soap. And then we decorated the rooms as well as we could. She'll want some pretty things, said Alice, coming from the land of parrots and opossums and gum trees and things. We did think of borrowing the stuffed wildcat that is in the bar at the ship, but we decided that our decorations must be very quiet. And the wildcat, even in its stuffed state, was anything but, so we borrowed a stuffed roach in a glass box and stood it on the chest of drawers. A roach is a type of fish that people catch. It looked very calm. Seashells are quiet things when they are vacant, and Mrs. Beale let us have the 4 big ones off her chiffonier. The girls got flowers, bluebells and white wood anemones. We might have had poppies or buttercups, but we thought the colours might be too loud. We took some books up for Mrs. Bax to read in the night, and we took the quietest ones we could find. They're being very considerate. I do hope they don't get into trouble this time. Sonnets on Sleep. Confessions of an Opium Eater. Twilight of the Gods. Diary of a Dreamer. And By Still Waters were some of them. I'm guessing the children assume that these are quiet books. The girls covered them with grey paper because some of the bindings were rather gay, rather bright and colourful. The girls hemmed grey calico covers for the drawers and the dressing table, and we drew the blinds half down, and when all was done, the room looked as quiet as a roosting wood pigeon. We put in a clock, but we did not wind it up. She can do that herself, said Dora, if she feels she can bear to hear it ticking. Oswald went to the station to meet her. He rode on the box beside the driver. When the others saw him mount there, I think they were sorry they had not been polite and gone to meet her. Oswald had a jolly ride. We got to the station just as the train came in. Only one lady got out of it, so Oswald knew it must be Mrs. Bax. If he had not been told how quiet she wanted to be, he would have thought she looked rather jolly. She had short hair and gold spectacles. Her skirts were short. Pencils. Gold spectacles. Her skirts were short, and she carried a parrot cage in her hand. That sounds interesting. Short, I don't think is what we would think of as short in this day and age. It contained our parrot, and when we wrote to tell Father that it and Pincher were the only things we wanted sent, we never thought she would have brought either. Mrs. Bax, I believe, was the only break Oswald made in the polite silence that he took the parrot cage and her bag from her in. "How do you do?" she said very briskly for a tired lady, and Oswald thought it was noble of her to make the effort to smile. "Are you Oswald or Dickie?" Oswald told her in one calm word which he was, and then Pincher rolled madly out of a dog box, almost into his arms. Pincher would not be quiet. Of course, he did not understand the need for it. Oswald conversed with Pincher in low, restrained whispers as he led the way to the ship's fly. I'm just going to check something. Sorry. The Lady and the License, or Friendship's Garland. Okay. Just wondering if there was anything about the title that would help me to get where this is going. He put the parrot cage on the inside seat of the carriage, held the door open for Mrs. Bax with silent politeness, closed it as quietly as possible, and prepared to mount on the box. "Oh, won't you come inside?" asked Mrs. Bax. "Do." "No, thank you," said Oswald in calm and mouse-like tones, and to avoid any more jaw, he got at once onto the box with Pincher, so that Mrs. Bax was perfectly quiet for the whole 6 miles, unless you count the rattle and shake up and down of the fly. That's the little carriage. On the box, Oswald and Pincher tasted the sweets of a blissful reunion, like it says in novels, and the man from the ship, that's the pub, looked on and said how well-bred Pincher was. It was a happy drive. There was something almost awful about the sleek, quiet tidiness of the others, who were all standing in a row outside the cottage to welcome Mrs. Bax. They all said, "How do you do?" in hushed voices, and all looked as if butter would not melt in any of their young mouths. I never saw a more soothing-looking lot of kids. She went to her room, and we did not see her again till tea time. Then, still exquisitely brushed and combed, we sat around the board in silence. That's the table. We had left the tea tray in place for Mrs. Bax, of course, but she said to Dora, "Wouldn't you like to pour out?" And Dora replied in low, soft tones, "If you wish me to, Mrs. Bax, I usually do." And she did. We passed each other bread and butter and jam and honey with silent courteousness, and of course we saw that she had enough to eat. "Do you manage to amuse yourselves pretty well here?" she asked presently. We said, "Yes, thank you," in hushed tones. "What do you do?" she asked. We did not wish to excite her by telling her what we did, so Dickie murmured, "Nothing in particular," at the same moment that Alice said, "All sorts of things." "Tell me about them," said Mrs. Bax invitingly. We replied by a deep silence. She sighed and passed her cup for more tea. "Do you ever feel shy?" she asked suddenly. "I do dreadfully, with new people." She's assuming the children are quiet because they're shy. We liked her for saying that, and Alice replied that she hoped she would not feel shy with us. "I hope not," she said. "Do you know, there was such a funny woman in the train. She had 17 different parcels, and she kept counting them, and one of them was a kitten, and it was always under the seat when she began to count, so she always got the number wrong." We should have liked to hear about that kitten, especially what colour it was and how old, but Oswald felt that Mrs. Bax was only trying to talk for our sakes, so that we shouldn't feel shy. So he simply said, "Will you have some more cake?" And nothing more was said about the kitten. Mrs. Bax seemed very noble. She kept trying to talk to us about Pincher and trains and Australia, but we were determined she should be kept quiet, as she wished it so much, and we restrained our brimming curiosity about opossums up gum trees, and about emus and kangaroos and wattles, and only said yes and no, or more often nothing at all. When tea was over, we melted away like snow wreaths in the thaw gene, and went out on the beach and had a yelling match. Our throats felt as though they were full of wool from the hushed tones we had used in talking to Mrs. Bax. Oswald won the match. Next day we kept carefully out of the way except for meals. Mrs. Bax tried talking again at breakfast time, but we checked our wish to listen and passed the pepper, salt, mustard, bread, toast, butter, marmalade, and even the cayenne vinegar and oil with such politeness that she gave up. We took it in turns to watch the house and drive away organ grinders. We told them they must not play in front of that house because there was an Australian lady who had to be kept quiet, and they went at once. This cost us expense because an organ grinder will never consent to fly the spot under twopence a flight. We went to bed early. We were quite weary with being so calm and still, but we knew it was our duty and we liked the feel of having done it. The day after that was the day Jake Lee got hurt. Jake is the man who drives about the country in a covered cart with pins and needles and combs and frying pans and all sorts of things that farmers' wives are likely to want in a hurry, and no shop for miles. I have always thought Jake's was a beautiful life. I should like to do it myself. Well, this particular day he had got his cart all ready to start and had got his foot on the wheel to get up when a motor car went by puffing and hooting. I always think motor cars seem so rude somehow. And the horse was frightened, and no wonder. It shied, and poor Jake was thrown violently to the ground and hurt so much that they had to send for the doctor. Of course, we went and asked Mrs. Jake if we could do anything, such as take the cart out and sell things to farmers' wives, but she thought not. It was after this that Dickie said, "Why shouldn't we get things of our own and go and sell them, with Bates' donkey?" Oswald was thinking the same thing, but he wishes to be fair, so he owns that Dickie spoke first. We all saw at once that the idea was a good one. "Shall we dress up for it?" H.O. asked. We thought not. It is always good sport to dress up, but I have never heard of people selling things to farmers' wives in really beautiful disguises. "We ought to go as shabby as we can," said Alice, "but somehow that always seems to come natural to your clothes when you've done a few interesting things in them. We have plenty of clothes that look poor but deserving. What shall we buy to sell?" "Pins and needles and tape and bodkins," said Dora. "Butter," said Noel. "It is terrible when there is no butter." "Honey is nice," said H.O., "and so are sausages." "Jake has ready-made shirts and corduroy trousers." "I suppose a farmer's shirt and trousers may give at any moment," said Alice, "and if he can't get new ones he has to go to bed till they are mended." Oswald thought tin tacks and glue and string must often be needed to mend barns and farm tools with if they broke suddenly, and Dickie said, "I think the pictures of ladies hanging onto crosses in foaming seas are good. Jake told me he sold more of them than anything. I suppose people suddenly break the old ones, and home isn't home without a lady holding on to a cross." Actually, that's a bit of an odd one. Is that a picture that you've seen somewhere before? Maybe you can look one up and post it over in the Discord server so we know what they're talking about. We went to Munn's shop and we bought needles and pins and tapes and bodkins, a pound of butter, a pot of honey and one of marmalade, and tin tacks. Those are furniture tacks or thumb tacks. Drawing pins, something like that. String and glue, but we could not get any ladies with crosses, and the shirts and trousers were too expensive for us to dare to risk it. Instead, we bought a headstall for 18p, because how providential we should be to a farmer whose favourite horse has escaped, and he had nothing to catch it with. A headstall is a bridle or a harness, one or the other. The bit of leather straps that goes around a horse's head without having the reins attached to it. Um, 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 um. A farmer whose favourite horses escaped and he had nothing to catch it with, and 3 tin openers in case of a distant farm subsisting entirely on tinned things, and the only opener for miles lost down the well or something. We also bought several other thoughtful and far-sighted things. That night at supper we told Mrs. Bax what we wanted to do, that we wanted to go out for the day. She had hardly said anything that supper time, and now she said, "Where are you going? Teaching Sunday school?" As it was Monday, we felt her poor brain was wandering, most likely for want of quiet, and the room smelt of tobacco smoke, so we thought someone had been to see her and perhaps been too noisy for her. So Oswald said gently, "No, we are not going to teach Sunday school." Mrs. Bax sighed. Then she said, "I am going out myself tomorrow for the day." "I hope it will not tire you too much," said Dora with soft-voiced and cautious politeness. "If you want anything bought, we could do it for you, with pleasure, and you could have a nice quiet day at home." "Thank you," said Mrs. Bax shortly, and we saw she would do what she chose, whether it was really for her own good or not. She started before we did next morning, and we were careful to be mouse quiet till the ship's fly, which contained her, was out of hearing. Then we had another yelling competition, and Noel won with that new shriek of his that is like railway engines in distress. And then we went and fetched Bates' donkey and cart, and packed our bales in it, and started, some riding and some running behind. Any faint, distant traces of respectableness that were left to our clothes were soon covered up by the dust of the road, and by some of the ginger beer bursting through the violence of the cart. Which had no springs. So bounce, 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 bounce in the cart, and then the ginger beer would pop open. Of course, terrible mess. Have you ever had a ginger beer bottle go bang and spray ginger beer everywhere? Terribly sticky, very messy. All the dust will stick to it. The first farm we stopped at, the woman really did want some pins, for though a very stupid person, trying to make sense of this sentence. Really did want some pins, for though a very stupid person, she was making a pink blouse, and we said, "Do have some tape. You never know when you may want it." "I believe in buttons," she said. "No strings for me, thank you." Tape for tying up. But when Oswald said, "What about pudding strings? You can't button up puddings as if they were pillows," she consented to listen to reason, but it was only 2pence altogether. But at the next place the woman said we were mummickers, and told us to get along, do, and she set her dog at us. But when Pincher sprang from the inmost recesses of the cart, she called her dog off. But it was too late, for it and Pincher were locked in the barking, scuffling, growling embrace of deadly combat. When we had separated the dogs, she went into her house and banged the door, and we went on through the green flat marshes among the buttercups and may bushes. "I wonder what she meant by mummickers," said H.O. "She meant she saw our high-born airs through our shabby clothes," said Alice. Don't know about that. "It's always happening, especially to princes. There's nothing so hard to conceal as a really high-bred air." "I've been thinking," said Dicky, "whether honesty wouldn't perhaps be the best policy. Not always, of course, but just this once. If people knew what we were doing it for, they might be glad to help on the good work." "What?" So obviously somebody had reacted to his statement. "So at the next farm, which was half hidden by trees, like the picture at the beginning of Sensible Susan," which is a book they read, obviously, "we tied the pony to the gatepost and knocked at the door. It was opened by a man this time, and Dora said to him, 'We are honest traders. We are trying to sell these things to keep a lady who is poor. If you buy some, you will be helping too. Wouldn't you like to do that? It is good work, and you will be glad of it afterwards when you come to think over the acts of your life.'" "'Pon my word and honour," said the man, whose red face was surrounded by a frill of white whiskers. "If ever I see a walking tract, here it is stands." "She doesn't mean to be tractish," said Oswald quickly. "It's only her way. But we really are trying to sell things to help a poor person. No humbug, sir. So if we have got anything you want, we shall be glad. And if not, well, there's no harm in asking, is there, sir?" The man with the frilly whiskers was very pleased to be called Sir. Oswald knew he would be, and he looked at everything we'd got and bought the head stall and 2 tin openers and a pot of marmalade and a ball of string and a pair of braces. This came to 4 and 2pence, and we were very pleased. It really seemed that our business was establishing itself root and branch. When it came to its being dinner time, which was first noticed through H.O. beginning to cry and say he did not want to play any more, it was found that we had forgotten to bring any dinner. So we had to eat some of our stock, the jam, the biscuits, and the cucumber. "I feel a new man," said Alice, draining the last of the ginger beer bottles. "At that homely village on the brow of yonder hill, we shall sell all the remains of the stock and go home with money in both pockets." But our luck had changed. As so often happens, our hearts beat high with hopeful thoughts, and we felt jollier than we had done all day. Merry laughter and snatches of musical song re-echoed from our cart and from round it as we went up the hill. All nature was smiling and gay. There was nothing sinister in the look of the trees or the road or anything. Dogs are said to have inside instincts that warn them of intending peril, but Pincher was not a bit instinctive that day somehow. He sported gaily up and down the hedge banks after pretending rats, and once he was so excited that I believe he was playing at weasels and stoats. But of course there are really no trace of these savage denizens of the jungle. It was just Pincher's varied imagination. We got to the village, and with joyful expectations we knocked at the first door we came to. Alice had spread out a few choice treasures, needles, pins, tape, a photo frame, and the butter, rather soft by now, and the last of the tin openers, on a basket lid, like the fishman does, with herrings and whitings, and plums and apples. You cannot sell fish in the country unless you sell fruit too. The author does not know why this is. The sun was shining, the sky was blue, there was no sign at all of the intending thunderbolt, meaning impending. Not even when the door was opened. This was done by a woman. She just looked at our basket lid of things anyone might have been proud to buy and smiled. I saw her do it. Then she turned her traitorous head and called, "Jim!" into the cottage. A sleepy grunt rewarded her. "Jim, I say," she repeated. "Come here directly, minute." Next moment Jim appeared. He was Jim to her because she was his wife, I suppose, but to us he was the police, with his hair ruffled from his hateful sofa cushions, no doubt, and his tunic unbuttoned. "What's up?" he said in a husky voice, as if he had been dreaming that he had a cold. "Can't a chap have a minute to himself to read the paper in?" "You told me to," said the woman. "You said if any folks come to the door with things, I was to call you, whether or no." Even now we were blind to the disaster that was entangling us in the meshes of its trap. Alice said, "We've sold a good deal, but we've some things left, very nice things, these crochet needles." But the police, who had buttoned up his tunic in a hurry, said quite fiercely, "Let's have a look at your licence." "We didn't bring any," said Noel, "but if you will give us an order, we'll bring you some tomorrow." He thought a licence was a thing to sell that we ought to have thought of. "None of your lip," was the unexpected reply of the now plainly brutal constable. "Where's your licence, I say?" "We have a licence for our dog, but father's got it," said Oswald, always quick-witted, but not this time quite quick enough. "Your hawker's licence is what I want, as well as you knows, you young limb. Your peddler's licence, your licence to sell things. You ain't half so half-witted as you want to make out." "We haven't got a peddler's licence," said Oswald. If we had been in a book, the police would have been touched to tears by Oswald's simple honesty. He would have said, "Noble boy," and then gone on to say he had only asked the question to test our honour. But life is not really at all the same as books. I have noticed lots of differences. Instead of behaving like the book police, this thick-headed constable said, "Blowed if I wasn't certain of it. Well, my young blokes, you'll come along of me to Sir James. I've got orders to bring up the next case afore him." "Case?" said Dora. "Oh, don't. We didn't know we oughtn't to. We only wanted—" "Oh, yes," said the constable. "You can tell all that to the magistrate, and anything you say will be used against you." "I'm sure it will," said Oswald. "Dora, don't lower yourself to speak to him. Come, we'll go home." The police was combing its hair with a half-toothless piece of comb, and we turned to go, but it was in vain. Ere any of our young and eager legs could climb into the cart, the police had seized the donkey's bridle. We could not desert our noble steed, and besides, it wasn't really ours, but Bates's, and this made any hope of flight quite a forlorn one. For better, for worse, we had to go with the donkey. "Don't cry, for goodness' sake," said Oswald in stern undertones. "Bite your lips, take long breaths. Don't let him see we mind. This beast's only the village police. Sir James will be a gentleman. He'll understand. Don't disgrace the house of Bastable. Look here, fall into line. No, Indian file will be best. There are so few of us. That's single file. Alice, if you snivel, I'll never say you ought to have been a boy again. H.O., shut your mouth. No one's going to hurt you. You're too young." "I am trying," said Alice, gasping. "No," Oswald went on, now as so often showing the brilliant qualities of the born leader in general. "Don't you be in a funk. Remember how Byron fought for the Greeks at Missy What's-its-name. He didn't grass, and he was a poet like you. Now, look here, let's be game. Dora, you're the eldest. Strike up. Any tune. We'll march up and show this sneak we Bastables aren't afraid, whoever else is." You will perhaps find it difficult to believe, but we did strike up. We sang the British Grenadiers, and when the police told us to stow it, we did not. And Noel said, "Singing isn't dogs or peddlering. You don't want a licence for that." "I'll soon show you," said the police. But he had to jolly well put up with our melodious song, because he knew that there isn't really any law to prevent you singing if you want to. We went on singing. It soon got easier than at first, and we followed Bates's donkey and cart through some lodge gates and up a drive with big trees, and we came out in front of a big white house, and there was a lawn. We stopped singing when we came in sight of the house, and got ready to be polite to Sir James. There were some ladies on the lawn in pretty blue and green dresses. This cheered us. Ladies are seldom quite heartless, especially when young. The police drew up Bates' donkey opposite the big front door with pillars and rang the bell. Our hearts were beating desperately. We cast glances of despair at the ladies. Then quite suddenly Alice gave a yell that wild Indian war whoops are simply nothing to, and tore across the lawn and threw her arms round the green waist of one of the ladies. "Oh, I'm so glad," she cried. "Oh, save us. We haven't done anything wrong. Really and truly we haven't." And then we all saw that the lady was our own Mrs. Redhouse, that we liked so much. So we all rushed to her, and before that police had got the door answered, we had told her our tale. The other ladies had turned away when we approached her, and gone politely away in a shrubbery. "There, there," she said, patting Alice and Noel, and as much of the others as she could get hold of. "Don't you worry, dears, don't. I'll make it all right with Sir James. Let's all sit down on a comfy heap and get our breaths again. I am so glad to see you all. My husband met your father at lunch the other day. I meant to come over and see you tomorrow." You cannot imagine the feelings of joy and safeness that we felt now we had found someone who knew we were Bastables and not vagrant outcasts like the police thought. The door had now been answered. We saw the base police talking to the person who answered it. Then he came towards us, very red in face. "Leave off bothering the lady," he said, "and come along with me. Sir James is in his library, and he's ready to do justice on you, so he is." Mrs. Redhouse jumped up, and so did we. She said with smiles as if nothing was wrong, "Good morning, Inspector." He looked pleased and surprised, as well he might, for it'll be long enough before he's within a mile of being that inspector. He's a constable, probably. Definitely not an inspector, because you go constable, police constable, and then you go sergeant, and then you go inspector. You're not just straight there. "Good morning, miss, I'm sure," he replied. "I think there's been a little mistake, Inspector," she said. "I expected some of your men led away by zeal for their duties, but I'm sure you'll understand. I'm staying with Lady Harborough, and these children are very dear friends of mine." The police looked very silly, but he said something about hawking without a licence. "Oh, no, not hawking," said Mrs. Redhouse. "Not hawking, surely. They were just playing at it, you know. Your subordinates must have been quite mistaken." She's giving him the benefit of the doubt, isn't she? "Our honesty bade us say that he was his own only subordinate, and that he hadn't been mistaken, but it is rude to interrupt, especially a lady, so we said nothing." The police said firmly, "You'll excuse me, miss, but Sir James expressly told me to lay a information directly next time I caught any of him at it without a licence." "But you see you didn't catch them at it," said Mrs. Redhouse took some money out of her purse. "You might just give this to your subordinates to console them for the mistake they've made. And look here, these mistakes do lead to trouble sometimes. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll promise not to tell Sir James a word about it, so nobody will be blamed." We listened breathless for his reply. He put his hands behind him. "Well, miss," he said at last, "you've managed to put the force in the wrong somehow, which isn't often done, and I'm blessed if I know how to make it out. But there's Sir James a-waiting for me to come before him with my complaint. What am I going to say to him?" "Oh, anything," said Mrs. Redhouse. "Surely someone else has done something wrong that you can tell him about." "There was a matter of a couple of snares and some night lines," he said slowly, drawing nearer to Mrs. Redhouse. "But I couldn't take no money, of course." "Of course not," she said. "I beg your pardon for offering it, but I'll give you my name and address, and if ever I can be of any use to you—" She turned her back on us while she wrote it down with a stumpy pencil he lent her, but Oswald could swear that he heard money chink, and that there was something large and round wrapped up in the paper she gave him. "Sorry for any little misunderstanding," the police now said, feeling the paper with his fingers, "and my respects to you, miss, and your young friends. I'd best be going." And so he went. To Sir James, I suppose. He seemed quite tamed. I hope the people who set the snares got off. "So that's all right," said Mrs. Redhouse. "Oh, you dear children, you must stay to lunch, and we'll have a splendid time." "What a darling princess you are," Noel said slowly. "You are a witch princess too, with magic powers over the police." "It's not a very pretty sort of magic," she said, and she sighed. "Everything about you is pretty," said Noel, and I could see him beginning to make the faces that always precur his poetry fits. But before the fit could break out thoroughly, the rest of us awoke from our stupor of grateful safeness and began to dance round Mrs. Redhouse in a ring. And the girls sang, "The rose is red, the violet's blue, carnation's sweet, and so are you," over and over again. So we had to join in, though I think "She's a Jolly Good Fellow" would have been more manly and less like a poetry book. Suddenly a known voice broke out in our singing. "Well," it said, and we stopped dancing. And there were the other ladies who had politely walked off when we first discovered Mrs. Redhouse, and one of them was Mrs. Bax, of all the people in the world, and she was smoking a cigarette. So now we knew where the smell of tobacco came from in the White House. We said, "Oh," in one breath, and were silent. "Is it possible," said Mrs. Bax, "that these are the Sunday school children I have been living with these 3 long days?" "We're sorry," said Dora softly. "We wouldn't have made a noise if we'd known you were here." "So I suppose," said Mrs. Bax. "Chloe, you seem to be a witch. How have you galvanized my 6 rag dolls into life like this?" "Rag dolls," said H.O. before we could stop him. "I think you're jolly mean and ungrateful, and it was 6pence for making the organs fly." "My brain's reeling," said Mrs. Bax, putting her hands to her head. "H.O. is very rude, and I am sorry," said Alice, "but it is hard to be called rag dolls when you've only tried to do as you were told." And then, in answer to Mrs. Redhouse's questions, we told how father had begged us to be quiet, and how we had earnestly tried to. When it was told, Mrs. Bax began to laugh, and so did Mrs. Redhouse, and at last Mrs. Bax said, "Oh, my dears, you don't know how glad I am that you're really alive. I began to think, oh, I don't know what I thought. You're not rag dolls, you're heroes and heroines, every man jack of you, and I do thank you." But I never wanted to be quiet like that. I just didn't want to be bothered with London and tiresome grown-up people. And now let's enjoy ourselves. Shall it be rounders or stories about cannibals? Rounders first and stories after, said H.O., and it was so. Mrs. Bax, now that her true nature was revealed, proved to be A1. The author does not ask for a jollier person to be in the house with. We had rare larks the whole time she stayed with us, and to think we might never have known her true character if she hadn't been an old school friend of Mrs. Redhouse's, and if Mrs. Redhouse hadn't been such a friend of ours. Friendship, said Mr. William Smith, as Mr. William Smith so truly says in his book about Latin, is the crown of life. And that's the last page in that chapter, and I'm just going to check to see how far till the end of the book. Oh my goodness, it's a little bit too long for today. Sorry. We have one more chapter to go in this book, and then we'll be starting our next book. So, what do you think? That was quite a good rescue, that one, wasn't it? Quite a good save. That poor policeman, doing his job and then getting into trouble for it. Oh well, he got something from it in the end anyway. So, we'll see you next time. But before you go, don't forget to follow me on Twitch or subscribe to my channel on YouTube, and you'll be notified when I go live. And also, if you enjoy watching these stories, you'll find that on my channel over on YouTube that there are collections of other books that I have read arranged as playlists. Most of them are one book per playlist. There's one where it's a couple of books, and then there's one where it's all the stories from all the books. That's the Millie Molly Mandy ones, which is what I started with in lockdown last year, 18 months ago. So feel free, if you need to listen to some stories in the background when you're doing something else like cooking or studying or whatever, and you just want to hear a voice droning on in the background, no music, nothing else, but a real person, to have a listen, choose a playlist, put it on, and just listen and relax. It gives your mind something to drift away with while your hands are busy doing something that you need to do. So we shall see you next time, and I look forward to seeing you next time for our last chapter of New Treasure Seekers. And you'll have to be here next time to find out what our new book is going to be, because we'll probably start it next session as well, because we've only got one chapter in this book to read. And I'll see you then. Bye.